Hi, everyone. I reached across the other side of the world again to my colleague, my friend, Dr. Denise Furness. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here and chatting with you, Amanda.
You too. So we met at the Integrative Health Symposium, kind of like, passing in a conference room. So that was in New York, maybe about 3 years ago. And then again last year, I had the luck to come to Sydney, Australia. And I was supposed to be with you last week. So it was
We
like
were
the first week of April.
we were meant to
Yeah.
be traveling together in Australia, but with all this going on, it's obviously not happening.
No, so we have to kind of talk across the world like this, which we have quite a little bit. Denise is amazing. Not only just this like really grounded, beautiful person, but she's also a genius because she's
Thank
a
you.
PhD in molecular genetics. So it's very cool to have someone to talk to who has a degree in molecular genetics because we can geek out together. And we're going to get to genetics, but what we're really going to dig into is something you told me the other day that your husband reminded you of, which was what, Denise? Oh,
I, what did I tell you that my
what
husband
is it?
reminded you of? So I'm ruining the interview.
No, it's funny. I should threw that at you.
About immune health, taking
No, it's
care
an
of.
immune health. But before you specialized in genetics, you
Oh,
actually worked
in virology.
in virology. So
Yeah,
you were working in virology before you
nutrigenomics. I was. Sorry, I had multiple things come to my mind then. As you know, Amanda, my husband's been really sick and I was really concerned that we had corona. He's still a bit unwell. So we've had lots of conversations about what the things that I have done, and I haven't been as affected as him. So I thought we were going to jump into all the things I'm doing to protect myself. But the virology stuff,
That's
yes,
true.
exactly. So, obviously the last 15, almost 20 years is all around nutrigenomics. But prior to that, I worked at a place called the Animal Health Laboratory, CSIRO, that is currently doing the first lot of vaccine trials right now here in Australia. And it's an amazing place. I tell people it was like working on the moon because you're literally going through airlocks and you're working with viruses that potentially, and pathogens that can potentially affect you and infect you. So yeah, I characterized a paramyxovirus, a bit different to a coronavirus, but worked with viruses that jumped from animals to humans, similar to coronaviruses, and was looking at new outbreaks. So I do have some experience in this area, and I'm really glad that Ryan brought all that up because in the last few weeks, I have been drawing on that experience to try to sort of share some information with people, because here in Australia there's a lot of confusion, panic, and people jumping to some crazy conclusions, and I feel like I've been able to help some of them understand a bit more about just actually this virus and genetically how these things happen, and it's not as crazy and out there as some people are thinking it is.
So let's set the record straight then. Let's talk about that.
Yeah,
Let's talk about viruses. And one thing
yeah.
you said to me, they're very commonplace, and how this one became an outlier, and what we do know, don't know. Let's jump into that.
Yeah, so I guess, what I've been trying, and I was telling you and telling everyone, because of the hysteria that has been going on, is I've just been trying to make people understand this is actually not that unusual. And when I say it's not that unusual, yes, right now having to change our lives and the way we live, that's unusual.
Mhm.
But a virus actually genetically altering, making it more infectious, or jumping from an animal to a human, that stuff happens all the time. All the time. And actually, my old supervisor, Limfa Wang, was the first to sort of really discover that association between bats and SARS, the coronavirus that is very similar to this one that causes COVID-19. So with this one's been called SARS coronavirus 2 because it's so similar to that 2002 outbreak with SARS. So these things are happening all the time, not just in coronaviruses. There are other families of viruses. It's just with the coronaviruses, what we've seen over the last 20 or so years is they do tend to becoming a bit more infectious and more deadly. So with SARS, that first one, the mortality rate was about 10%. Then there was MERS, which has really been more focused in the Middle East. The mortality rate's 35%. So that's really high. But it is less likely to transfer between sort of human to human. It's more so, it actually comes from camels. It's more so sort of being with the animal, and then it gets to the human. So we've known for a long time these coronaviruses are evolving, like all viruses. They adapt, they evolve, they genetically sort of mutate, or in some cases even recombination. So two viruses, perhaps in a bird or a bat, two viruses might actually come together that are very similar and actually sort of mix genes, and that can actually cause it to be much more infectious because our bodies don't have antibodies. You know, when it's a new virus, our bodies don't have that immune response with sort of antibodies to protect us, and that's the case with this one too. So it's a new form. So coronaviruses aren't new, but this is a novel, a new strain. It's genetically sort of changed, and I think what I was saying to you too is not only is this not unusual, it's just that this one got out. That is the problem too. So here in Australia, and I'm sure it's very similar for you and your listeners in America, we live a pretty good life in that we don't have these kind of outbreaks. Other countries, you know, in Asia and different places have experienced these, you know, in my lifetime. But in Australia, I haven't seen this in my lifetime because we have fantastic healthcare. We have places like CSIRO where I worked, where they've got great diagnostic capabilities. They train for these things. And generally someone would be isolated very quickly and these things are contained. In this particular case, it wasn't picked up straight away. A lot of people flew out for Chinese New Year and all sorts of things. It was just a timing thing, and it didn't get contained. And we know this one has a high infectious rate. So compared to the flu, people are more likely to get it. I mean, just here in Noosa where I am, it was a few weeks ago now, but there was a dinner party at a restaurant and 14 people got infected and 4 staff. So that just shows you how infectious this is. So, and people have been flying all over the world, and now we have a pandemic. So, you know, yes, it's an unusual time in that we're having to change the way we work, the way we live, but the reality is viruses adapting and genetically evolving, that is actually not unusual at all. And, you know, scientists probably know a lot about coronaviruses, and actually we're expecting this. And I think I might have mentioned to you a particular paper published back in 2012 actually kind of predicted this, a scientific paper, a research paper that basically said, based on these last coronaviruses, we have to monitor these. This could lead to some, you know, a big sort of public health concern.
So how do you, I mean, each virus is unique, I guess. So if you're sitting back in the lab looking at this virus, I mean, how do you, I don't say how do you treat it, because if we knew that we would stop it, right? But what denatures a virus? I mean, do you have to pierce the outer membrane? What literally do you do in a lab, so we have some idea of, you know, how you could stop it replicating if there's a kind of procedure? I know it's unique to each virus, but.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, I wouldn't necessarily, you know, in the lab, I guess what I was doing too, where we're genetically trying to characterize new viruses, you know, where we've got little, you know, sections where it's just a lot of sequencing, basically, a lot of, you know, PCR and sequencing and bioinformatics. So I wasn't necessarily trying to sort of kill a virus. But, you know, I guess, to be honest, we probably all know what we need to do. And that is, you know, when we talk about washing our hands, it seems so basic, but actually detergents, particularly with these viruses, and I will just say one thing with this particular virus and things like the flu, these are RNA viruses. So if it's a DNA virus, they're generally a bit more stable. And once a DNA virus gets into our cells, there's a bit of a proofreading step. So if there is a genetic change, it can kind of fix it. With RNA viruses, they don't have that. So any genetic change, and if it happens to be a genetic change that is a benefit, even though we say mutation, if it's a benefit to that virus, it's then obviously going to, you know, help it adapt. And so the RNA viruses tend to sort of mutate or genetically alter quicker. And some of them, like in this case with coronavirus, they do have this kind of lipid layer, this envelope around them. And because of that little lipid layer, if you're using a detergent, just like you're washing the dishes and getting the fat off your dishes, that detergent will literally bust open that lipid layer.
Right, that's sort of organic chemistry, right? Where you kind of like attract or whatever, the electrons, what I remember that in organic chemistry. Yeah. So did you hear that, everyone? Soap works.
Yeah, so literally, I mean, in this case, because of that lipid layer, you're actually killing the virus. You know, the contents will spill out and no longer will it be, you know, I think most of us now have seen the picture of the coronavirus. It's like a circle with all these, you know, little spikes coming out. That breaks open and the contents come out. And, you know, so detergents and of course alcohol. And in the lab, you know, anyone working in a lab, you know, we talk about these hand sanitizers or sort of 60% alcohol in a lab. You know, you're always constantly spraying the bench tops with, you know, isopropyl, basically alcohol. Doesn't matter what you're doing.
It's interesting. Our local breweries, I don't know in Australia, but we have a few local to me, and they, you know, obviously they can't sell directly to the public, being quite creative, but they're producing sanitizer because what do they produce? Alcohol, right? So yeah, very creative.
Such a shortage. So it seems so basic. But things like that, you know, and obviously, you know, people making sure they're not spreading the germs, but stuff like that works. I don't know if you found the information, and I don't think we have discussed it, but I know you asked me a few weeks ago about vinegar and lemon.
Yeah.
Have you found the answer to that?
No, because I was just about to get to the definitive answer to washing produce. You know, how long does the virus sit on surfaces? How should you wash your produce? I have some of my own answers, but in a live broadcast with clinicians who were looking at from the culinary perspective, this whole conversation came up about, well, if you use something that changes the pH, how does that work with the virus? And I didn't have an answer and I haven't seen it.
I think I said to you, you think it was just a message you sent to me, and I kind of just threw back an answer and said, oh, you know, I think it would, you know, vinegar and lemon. But as soon as I thought about it, I thought I don't actually think that's going to work, because we know the virus can infect the gut, you know, wherever these ACE receptors are. And think about the pH in your gut. It's quite acidic.
It is.
So the virus can actually withstand being in the gut, and actually they can isolate viral particles from a stool sample, which can then be cultured, which means that virus can sort of replicate. So if we can get it from stool, and we know that it can infect the gut, and think about the pH level, the acidity level in our gut, I don't think things like lemon or vinegar would actually work, because we know that it can survive the gut.
Yeah, you have to be super careful, you know, to say, I actually don't know, which is what I need to do on that broadcast, because to say something and people can run a mile with it. And yeah.
And you would think, honestly, when you sent me the message, off the top of my head, without actually thinking, I was like, yeah, you know, vinegar and lemon juice, acetic acid. But then when I stopped and went, hang on, we know that we can culture. So one of the ways that it can be, you know, transferred is, you know, from that fecal, you know, touching, you know, little kids that are doing all sorts of things.
Awesome.
And wash our hands, right? Because I've seen it cultured from stool, and also they talk about that when we're, especially with children, not spreading it, even though children seem to get quite mild symptoms.
Yes.
They can still spread it, and, you know, and often their hygiene is not as good as us.
Very good point. Yeah, no wonder I have friends who are just say, oh my gosh, you know, we're gonna, you know, this with our children washing their hands, because the kids aren't going to understand. But you're right, they could easily spread something. Just anyway, lovely topic.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, this just rolls off the tongue, because I've got a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. No issues with the 7-year-old, but the 3-year-old, you know, still having to go to the toilet. So she just hands on the toilet seat, and you're like, don't touch the toilet seat.
I know, they don't know. So
they're home, so it's fine. But kids are out and about, and I do think that's an important message for us to communicate. I don't know what it's like in the States, but in Australia, they keep reinforcing that children, we don't really have to worry about children. And I'm still concerned. We've decided to keep our kids at home, and have for a few weeks. Believe me, I would love my daughter to be at childcare.
Every time I talk to you, the daughters, oh, she's so sweet.
Exactly. But we are not just doing it for our children, but particularly because Ryan's been sick too. And even though we've been negative, we don't want to spread things to other people. So, you know, I think that we need to realize that they can, you know, house these pathogens, viruses and bacteria, and they're good little spreaders.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a couple of questions kind of. So the other thing is, because you just talked about soap, and there's been all kinds of articles about how to wash your produce. So we know the vinegar and lemon thing, let's take that off. There's lots of old wives' tales and there's lots of ideas, but one of the ones that keeps coming through is do not wash your produce with detergent. And yet we know, I'm not advocating one way or another right now, that we know that detergent can actually kill a virus, but how long can a virus survive on food? Do we really definitively?
I don't think it would survive very long, because there's been quite a few papers published in this sort of short amount of time, but just remember what's being published right now, a lot of it hasn't been peer reviewed and not kind of validated, because we're just trying to get as much information out as possible. But from the information, which does seem to be pretty good, but just be mindful it could change. But at this point, it looks like the virus definitely can survive, whether you say they're alive or not, that's another debate. I always say viruses are not alive because they can't replicate without a cell, but then, you know, it's a confusing one. But they can they can possibly still infect someone and be on a hard surface like stainless steel or hard plastic for days. I don't think it's much more than a few days, but it can be days. But more porous things, like even your hands, you know, we say wash your hands. I should be cautious saying this because I didn't go and check all the references, but I read something just recently that the virus probably only lasts about 20 minutes on your hands anyway, because they're quite porous and things like that. So whether that's true or not, but think about your vegetables and things. It's not a hard surface. It is quite porous. I don't, even if it did survive, I don't think it'd be much more than a few days, but really probably hours. Like if I had to say, and this is not based on me seeing evidence where they've tested on food, but I think with food, it would probably only be hours. When you think with cardboard, it's sort of hours and things like that. I think the food, it wouldn't be very long.
So you have your like head of lettuce or whatever, you come from the supply chain, the store, to your cardboard box or whatever, then it goes in your refrigerator.
And, you know, and if it's in the fridge for a few days and it's, you know, cold and things like that, it's likely that it's not going to be in a state that it is able to infect you. But I would still be thinking about washing. I mean, even water, even though we talk about the detergent being such a good way of literally, you know, breaking open that virus and killing it, there's also studies just showing that, you know, just washing your hands with water can be effective. It's not as effective, but if you do wash your hands very thoroughly with water, that is effective too, because you're just sort of washing all this stuff off. So I think just thoroughly washing. I don't know of anyone at this point that has suggested that it can be transferred through food.
Yeah, that's our general guidance in the States. We just don't have definitive guidance, but I'm always mindful that, okay, some things do change and maybe different guidance coming from Australia. I think we're a little bit in that wait and see and watch and learn. But obviously it's the top of mind. So, I mean, I tell people, and I think you and I talked about it, if you're really concerned, but you want to eat something raw, buy the triple pack, you know, it'll be triple washed, it's pre-packaged. You can eat that raw. If not, just cook everything. You'll be okay. You know, cook.
But it's fine. Exactly. If you cook it, you're definitely killing everything. So if you cook it, and it may be that if you are immunocompromised, you do have some sort of comorbidity. Right now, like we all are, we're adapting. We've got kids at home. We're changing the way we work. You might actually just be cooking everything you eat for the next 4 weeks or so, just to be really, really sure. But I do think that the chances of getting it from food are quite low. But as I said, if you're immunocompromised, if you are sort of fitting into certain populations, you probably just want to take those extra precautions, and cooking it will definitely fix the issue.
Yeah, that's been the way I've approached it. So the other question I wanted to ask you, and I was just watching with some colleagues today, were talking about this. They said, and they're in the Midwest in the United States, they said, we think COVID's been among us for much longer than we think. In other words, you know, when they look back to say December or November last year, they had that achy feeling, prolonged cough, just something that wouldn't go away, but we weren't surrounded by a pandemic at that point in time. Is that possible at all? You know, you may have.
I've got a gut feeling. This is not with my science hat on. So I'm just taking my science hat off.
You know, so everyone, she took her science hat off. It's a question.
I've got a gut feeling it's been around longer too. And I'm saying this from personal experience with just how sick my husband has been.
Yes, yeah.
So I got back from New York, and when I got back from New York, there was no actual cases at that point. However, my kids got sick, and we got sick. I went off to New Zealand. I don't think I brought it back from New Zealand because he,
Yeah.
we got sick so quick. So I have a feeling. I know this is me, just a feeling. I think I got something in New York at the airport, brought it back, and to see my husband be sick for now almost 3 weeks, and
Yeah.
you've been hearing me, you've been getting the
Yeah.
update. My husband's young. He's younger than I am. He's fit. He's healthy. Low stress, definitely not like me. Mind you, he looks after the kids. Maybe he's more stressed than I realize, but he's been hit hard. Like, he was in bed for over a week, very
Yes.
flu, like struggling breathing to the point where I almost thought he had to go to hospital. And when you look at what corona is and what he's had, I just feel like he had that. And when I try to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, I'm like, well, I think it's been around longer. And, we look at what happened in China. It possibly was around months before they picked it up because
Right.
It's got similar symptoms. It's the flu and then a bit of pneumonia. And I feel like people are actually realizing that they've got the disease once it's actually really embedded in that population, because a lot of people are just getting sick and staying home. Most 80% of the population will have mild flu-like symptoms. They won't need to go to hospital. So that 80% of people, it might have been hanging around for a good month or so.
It's interesting. So does it get to like a critical mass where suddenly it gathers mass like a rolling stone or whatever, and then it becomes really virulent and it manifests at this level that is either it's people
exactly like that.
It's exactly like that. So okay,
like it's just kind of working its way through slowly, whether it was in the population a month or two before, or a particular area a month or two before. Regardless, it's exactly like what you said, in that it kind of starts slow. There's a few people here, there, everywhere, and that's sort of not too bad. But then when it gets to sort of this critical mass and lots of people have it, so many people do actually have high blood pressure, diabetes. Like, they're all the ones that are really, really sick. And I think I read, don't quote me, but science hat's back on. I read that in Italy, the people that were dying initially, some of them had between 3 to 5 morbidity. So they were quite unwell, but it hit them. But then the issue that we've seen in China, in Italy, when they started getting these higher death rates, and it looks like this is happening in New York too right now, is that hospital system is overwhelmed. Whereas if the hospital system wasn't overwhelmed, if people were coming through a little bit slower, perhaps they just need a little bit of, pop them on oxygen for a day or two, or a bit of support, they may be okay. But when people aren't getting that treatment, they're not getting the treatment from the doctors they need, then all of a sudden lots and lots of people are really, really sick.
Right, you've got, including people who don't have comorbidity or whatever. So what's going to be, there's nothing fascinating, but there is in the science. So to be respectful, what will be so useful after this is, when we can look back 2 years from now, hopefully in a shorter amount of time, but we have to be respectful of science when we are able to tease through the data and really understand what role did comorbidities play in this. Because, for me, Denise, that is such a throwdown to invest in public health.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like, if comorbidities, which can come as a result of not taking care of yourself, but also inequity, which, we absolutely need to recognize, food deserts and what have you. And if we underfund public health, but we have to close down an economy, which we have, then, does it make sense to invest in public health?
And you're exactly right. And, we are in such an amazing space as doctors, practitioners, people sharing the message of health, because it's showing us that if you're not well, how susceptible you are to these infections. And it's not just coronavirus, it's other things too. This is what's in the media right now. We're all seeing it. We know that these people are unwell. Not only are they unwell, they're probably not enjoying their lives very well because they're in pain, they're tired, all these kind of things. I mean, people can make a massive amount of difference with food and, nutrition and stress and sleep. I mean, it's so basic. I actually, what I'm doing at the moment is talking a lot to people about sleep. It seems so basic, but sometimes people just don't realize the impact. If you're not sleeping well, that's going to impair your immune system's ability to function. Like, there's so much that we can do. And even looking in, my situation, with Ryan, he is healthy, but he doesn't take all the supplements that I do. I'm definitely not here to push supplements.
No.
I only take them when I need them. But the second I felt symptoms,
That-
I was straight onto my liposomal C. I'm telling you, multiple times a day. I'm looking through the cupboard because I go to all these conferences. I get all these supplements. I'm like, okay, all right. We've got evidence that zinc, actually blocks the RNA replication of these viruses. I'm on my zinc. We've got vitamin C. What can I do? And none of these on their own are a cure. But I started getting real. I was like, no screen time at night. Focus on your sleep right now. Let's back off on the exercise. Let's think about heat, baths, hot bath. So I just implemented all this stuff very quickly and, helped myself recover. And if people know this stuff, know that they can start cooking up some food that's going to support their immune system, know that they can reach out to these tools that actually are based in evidence. There is quite a bit that people can do. I know there's no pharmaceutical or drug or vaccine right now, but there's a lot you can do lifestyle wise to really, boost your immune system and help deal with this and not just corona, but, all things.
So, and this is a question, so we're going to cross over to genetics. We're going to talk over to nutrition science and the immune system, immune modulation, because it was a question I said to you before we even started recording here that I've had it for a few of the people I've interviewed. And it comes down to, can we modulate the immune system upstream using food and supplementation, even if we don't know your genes? Knowing someone's genomics is just fantastic because you
absolutely
tackle. But I do think now we know so much in genetics and we know so much about the immune system and so much in nutritional biochemistry. Shouldn't we be sort of tackling things maybe while people are at home? Because we kind of know what nutrition does. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like the first thing, so as you were talking to me, two things were like flashing in my brain. One was vitamin D. Vitamin D, when we're talking about, supporting the immune system, the last 10 years, probably more than that, the amount of research around, vitamin D for helping with the immune system, and it's upstream. It's, it's helping turn things off and on and really regulates a lot of the genes and proteins involved in the immune system. So vitamin D, be thinking about that. And, if you live in a place where you get adequate sun, that's awesome. But if you don't, a lot of people in this day and age just have to supplement with vitamin D. I mean, I used to live in Melbourne, which is the southern part of Australia. And, almost everyone that came in the door at the clinic was low in vitamin D. It's so common and it's something that you can fix really easily. So vitamin D. The other thing is fish oil. So fish oil, the omega-3, so we're talking about the DHA and the EPA, two things. One, it dampens the immune response. So even though we're talking about sort of preventative, just thinking about to corona and, the acute symptoms, a lot of people are dying of sepsis. So this sort of cytokine storm. Right. If you've got things like, enough adequate of these omegas that actually help dampen this immune response,
that's true.
Interleukin 10. So having adequate omegas is really good. But also I have read, and this is just recently because of all the coronavirus stuff, I didn't realize that fish oils actually have something that stimulates the immune system and actually helps us fight viruses as well. So heaps of stuff. And we're meant to eat fish. Well, that's my opinion. We are, when you think about the brain and the amount of, DHA and things, I think we need to consume, we don't make it that effectively. So, we need to be consuming this from the diet. And to be honest, a lot of people don't eat oily fish. And actually some of my patients that are quite unwell, I work with some patients that have a lot of chemical sensitivities and things like that, and I'll tell them not to have seafood, unfortunately, because of how much we've polluted the oceans. So I do eat fish. I'm relatively well though, but for some of my patients, I'll say, I don't want you on fish right now. You've got a high burden of chemicals or toxins. Let's take fish out. So they'll have to supplement. And then there's some people that just don't like fish. So as soon as you said that, the two things, I'm sure there's lots of other things as well, even some of our herbal things that can help adaptogens, but vitamin D and fish oils just came straight to mind.
Yeah, no, totally. They're great block and tacklers. It's absolutely true. And I always think of, like, Brandon Brock and I were talking the other night about periscopes that can reach out, from inside the immune system and kind of, reach out into the gut and check stuff out and bring messages back. It was amazing. But I think of vitamin D like that. It's just kind of reaches into the immune system.
Yeah.
And you're so right, because when you look, it's incredible. When you,
Things off and on, yeah, it's communicating with things in our body. Exactly, yeah.
yeah, it was just a great topic. But we were like, what's that thing called? Oh, it's a periscope, on a submarine. Like, we think that's the word. But you know what, when you look at vitamin D, and then we'll kind of move on because I had another thought about how we can activate the immune system or at least modulate. When you think about foods that are naturally rich in vitamin D, most of them we throw away these days. Naturally rich are actually like organs, and awful. Same for vitamin A and CoQ10. But there's not a lot of foods.
Mm.
So our modern society, it's not surprising that we are deficient. And there's multiple genes in the pathway, right, that can actually, that are essential for how we get to the form of vitamin D that we need. So,
and some people genetically, will require a lot more vitamin D from the sun, if we're particularly from the sun, from supplements or foods as well. But just it's a complicated process. It's not like the UV hits the skin instantly vitamin D. It has to go through a number of sort of enzymes that are coded by genes, and some people have these variations that mean they're less likely to make as sort of much of that sort of active form of vitamin D. So some will definitely need more. But for me, who's now moved up to the Sunshine Coast, where, as it sounds, it is the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, I had my vitamin D levels tested. It would have been last year, so it was a while ago. But I was sitting right at this 100 nanomole, which you have a different.
We do, yeah. I have no idea
just
what
that the levels were good, and I have because I lived in the southern states and inside and things like that. I've had to supplement with someone who's had an autoimmune condition and recovered. I really have to. I've had Graves, quite severe Graves, and was told that I would never recover, but thankfully have. But vitamin D is something that I'll always have to monitor, along with a lot of other things to keep me well. Right. And I don't supplement with vitamin D anymore, and I don't sunbake, but just living a lifestyle where I'm outside more and I make an effort. Summer we jump in the pool or something, but 15 minutes a day, a little bit of sun, you actually don't need much, and your levels go up really high, but we just don't tend to go outside.
No, what comes to mind here is if we would jump into nutrition, and we talked about it the other day, that vitamin D is essential to insulin signaling as well.
Yes.
So I'm sure there is plenty of research that says that associates low levels of vitamin D with higher incidence of potential for diabetes, which of course is a huge risk factor.
And weight. We know that those that are low in vitamin D are more likely to be overweight and obese. So, then that puts you at risk for more metabolic, disorders and things as well. So, it's so many areas that it impacts. And I think because it does have that sort of epigenetic component, turning so many genes on. I think the last paper I read, it was a few years ago, I think it suggested that at that point they discovered about 900 genes that vitamin D was involved in regulating. And, let's see what happens over the next however many years. We might find out it's more than that.
It's like a master switch, people. So vitamin D, it's actually really important, but get your levels checked and see a clinician who understands.
Yeah. And maybe you can put a little note under your thing. We can put what 100 nanomole is in your.
I will, yes. Yeah.
Just know for us, it's in that kind of that good level. So 50 for us is low, 150 you're getting quite high. So I was in a good spot, but we can.
Yeah, and I think 52 is our kind of target is a good. So I will check that. So, exactly. But the other thing that came to mind here is oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is when we're sick or when we're not well, particularly if you're hospitalized for whatever reason. We're dealing with a huge amount of oxidative stress. And just like vitamin D is so essential to kind of modulating the immune system. So we have a way to activate the body's own endogenous antioxidants, to produce its own antioxidants, which is through this miracle of a pathway called NRF2, which I love to talk about.
Yeah, you said upregulate. I can't believe I didn't go there. Now I'm just like, how did I not think of that?
How did I not think about this? Block and tackle. So, we're tackling with vitamin D. We're blocking with omega-3 fatty acids, the EPA, DHA. I think DHA is even more profound blocker than EPA when I think about it. We can correct that later. Not right. But the other part is, how do you mitigate oxidative stress, which is a firestorm?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And we mitigate that by turning on this pathway, which we can do with a number of different foods.
Cruciferous vegetables, the first one that comes to mind. I mean, there's so much research around sulforaphane. And again, we talk about vitamin D, like the power of food, right? Like, well, vitamin D is the sun, but still the power of these things that come into our body. You know, the sulforaphane coming from the cruciferous vegetables and compounds in cruciferous vegetables, like vitamin D, turn genes on. And a lot of those are involved in that sort of, with, you know, liver support. And when we think about the immune system, we want to be supporting, you know, the gut, and we want to support the liver. You know, these are two things that are, you know, essential, exactly, for, you know, getting rid of chemicals and toxins and supporting the immune system. And most of the research I know is in association with cancer when we're talking about sulforaphane and cruciferous vegetables. And it's not that it just works for cancer. For any of you out there that's involved in research, you'll know that the studies are really based on who funds them and where the research dollars are. So as someone who works in genetics and nutrition, I'm trying to pull out the nutrition stuff, but most of the studies are in relation to sort of cancer. And what we know is that when we have these things that, you know, activate NRF2, they then turn on a whole host of immune and antioxidant related genes that just, you know, are very, very powerful, more powerful than, you know, having vitamin C. So it's interesting that the IV vitamin C, we started having this conversation and we thought we'd better jump into the interview. We didn't really finish, but we were talking about, you know, how, you know, IV vitamin C seems to be having some success, but, you know, it's really a secondary antioxidant when you think about things that can upregulate and turn on those powerful antioxidants in our system that, you know, can, you know.
That's why I'm wondering why we're not IV. I mean, because we don't know, like, you know, how do you sequester sulforaphane and put it, you know, into an IV? I actually don't know because I don't work in critical care, but that's where I'm thinking in terms of upstream modulations, maybe things that people can do at home regardless right now. So I want to be respectful, and also, you know, people who are sitting at home, they certainly don't feel well. So
I mean,
you know.
even just for me, I've made up, I've been wanting to put pictures on social media, I should, but, you know, I just made up this like soup. It felt like my nan's soup, but I just piled it full of kale. And I just, because I was like, okay, I just need some cruciferous vegetables. Like, what can I do? I need broccoli, I need cauliflower, I want kale. I'm eating Brussels. I've never eaten so many Brussels sprouts. I'm coming up with some great recipes with bacon and chicken and in the oven. But, you know, all these things are so good for us. And, you know, we can do that just to sort of turn these things on so that, you know, we are a little more resistant. We want to be less susceptible. And, you know, we can make a difference with these foods.
Yeah, and I think that's where this powerful field of genomics, it gets called genetics, but genomics helps us understand how genes operate, you know, what they do in the body. Biochemistry is sort of the operating system of the human body. And so the field of genomics helps us really understand what does activate and deactivate genes, whether it's emotional, whether it's food, whether it's environmental. It's the cutting edge of medicine. And, you know, Denise, it's my hope in my lifetime that every single human being, you know, has a DNA. They own their DNA. They just never get a chance to see it. So that's the work you and I do, is open the book.
Now, I shouldn't ask this because I should know, but talking about food and all these recipes, you being the expert at putting all these recipes and meal plans together, have you put something together for the immune system? This is a really silly question. I'm sure you have.
No, it's actually, I've been so busy seeing clients, you know, kind of reviewing their DNA with them, which is so revelatory. I've got to ask you this question before we jump off here, what it feels like to do that, because it's absolutely amazing. That I have sitting right next to you can't see it on my desk, is this stack of papers around immune modulation. So I just need to put together, you know, the pathways, because there's so many ways to look at it, where this is E and A and C work, and this is where bioactives work. So in the end, we come up with an ingredient roadmap. So a lot of my work is more in which nutrients in which ingredients, because once you know that, with standard recipes, you just dial it in. There's a few rules. So I haven't actually done it.
Let me know when you've got your, you know, corona prevention meal plan.
Oh, no, I will never. Yeah, we'll be in trouble if we call it corona prevention. It's
exactly.
like it's immune optimization.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people are onto this sort of right now, and, you know, really it's things that we've been talking about You know, another one we didn't really mention, you just said it then, you know, vitamin A. Think about vitamin A, you know, supporting the immune system, particularly for our mucosal membranes, you know, lung support, things like that. So, you know, getting people to be eating. And with vitamin A, from a genetic standpoint, you and I will know, because this is what we do. And I'm not sure what your question was going to be, but maybe this is leading into it. You know, we really can tailor things for our patients, because a lot of people may not be getting the vitamin A from animal sources. They're getting beta carotene. Even if they're taking a multivitamin, most of the time it's beta carotene, not sort of the retinol or retinoic acid. And genetically, if people have SNPs in something called BCMO1, so beta carotene monooxygenase, if they have SNPs in this, they don't convert from beta carotene to that active form of vitamin A very well. And this is a time where we need to have all of these things, that vitamin A, the zinc, the D, the C, you know, all the cruciferous, like all of these things. Let's give everything we have in our toolbox, so that we can be one of those people that if we do get it, because lots of people are going to get sick, like that's a fact, you know, the symptoms are mild and we just sort of push through and get on with it.
Yeah, totally. And what's interesting about vitamin A, of course, you need the retinol in the RXR receptor, which binds with vitamin D, so vitamin D can do its work.
Yes. And we didn't mention that too. You know, if you're low in vitamin A, you know, particularly that, you know, the form, then, you know, that can impact on vitamin D, you know, working and turning on all of these things, because, you know, there is that sort of that combined effect in that receptor with the vitamin D receptor. So it's really important. And I say to people too, even, you know, from a supplement perspective, you know, about maximizing your absorption of nutrients too. Like, think about having a little bit of fat in your diet. You know, if you're going to have your D and your A, have it with your eggs in the morning, or have it with something that's got some fat, because, you know, you've got to think about that absorption in the gut. These things need to sort of be absorbed, and we have certain transporters that are turned on when you have a meal with fat that's going to help you absorb those. And,
you know, it's interesting just talking to you, realize it, just kind of coming back to that statement, a little conversation we were having about public health, how people do get sick and are predisposed to immune dysfunction or comorbidities, because if you don't have a vitamin D supplement, if you don't eat seafood, where are you getting your omega-3 fatty acids from? And you don't know. We know in genetics, because we test people in genomics, I'll use the right term for us here. You know, you don't know if you convert beta carotene to retinol. And so there's a lot of, you know, this is where public health is so important, and really understanding, or letting it be available to people to understand their genetic predispositions, or their vitamin or mineral deficiencies, even if you don't know genetics, is so important.
And diets, you know, I think you've heard me say it before, you know, I'm not anti-vegan or vegetarian. You know, my patient, everything I do is personalized health. I mean, that's my thing. It's all about working with the patient and working out what's right for them. But for some people, you know, if they've got issues with transporting vitamin B12, if they've got issues with, you know, converting vitamin A, you know, you're going to be a vegan. Like, you need to be thinking about where are you going to get these sources. You need to be willing to have very good quality supplements, or, you know, that diet's not going to be good for you. It's not suiting your genetic makeup. You know, we're all slightly different, and there's no one kind of diet for everyone. I mean, you know, my perspective, and I think you're a little bit similar, I'm all about whole foods, lots of veggies, but I do eat, you know, lean quality meat. One great positive about all this is I have now reached out to local farmers. As someone who travels internationally a lot, I don't get organic boxes of food and things delivered with food wastage, but now I'm home. I'm home for many, many months. And as sad as lots of things are, you know, with shortages in supermarkets, I'm now getting stuff from local farmers. It's fantastic. Meats, happy chickens. I've seen the farm. They're running around. They're not even squashed at all, you know, like, it's great. So, you know, thinking about quality food, and if you don't have any cultural reasons and you're happy to eat meat, you know, a little bit of meat is good for all of those vitamins and minerals and proteins.
Yeah, it does provide the information in the right form, and can kind of jump over some of those inefficiencies in our genes. So talking to genes and sort of coming to the end here, because I know how I feel about this, but you work daily when you're not lecturing or researching or helping project. Great, I get to work with Denise.
I'm so excited. We got some work coming up together.
Yeah, super exciting. So you, like me, will sit down and you'll order a DNA test. We'll call it a DNA test. And you open up that test. What does that feel like to you when you read that test and can sit with an individual, with a patient, and reveal what that test tells them? What do you feel is when you do that?
How do I feel? I mean, I feel, I guess also thinking about, for me, I love being able to share that with someone. I mean, this is something that could change their lives. And for someone who does genetics, just know that I've also, worked with my kids, even though they don't know that. But, it's important for me at this age to know what they need more or less of, or genetic susceptibilities, because I want to set them up for health. So for me, I'm so grateful that I can share this information. And also, I think for the patient, it's quite empowering.
Exactly.
And I would like to sort of, reinforce that when I am working with my patients, I really try to make this a positive experience. I do work with a lot of kind of patients I see these days. Sadly, a lot of them are very, very sick. They've come to me because other things haven't worked and they're looking to go a bit deeper, and they're quite unwell. So, to have a positive spin on things can be quite difficult when someone's in such a challenging time. But, these results, even if they are negative, for lack of a better word, like it's showing that, hey, you don't process folate as well, or you're not so good at turning on these antioxidant genes. Once we've got that information, we know where to support you.
Exactly.
So focus in, and that's why I said there's no one diet for one person. There's no one supplement. So you're not only able to help them personally, you're then empowering them to take control of their own health. And that's what I like with my patients too, is that I'm educating them for them long-term to be able to continue living a life that actually gets them well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry.
No, I mean, for me, I'm glad to hear you say it. The word empowering is the word I see, and validating is another word. So I can literally have a blank sheet of paper in front of me. And that's what I tell my patients. I'm going to assume nothing. I open the book. I see patterns, and I can ask you questions, and about 95% of the time they'll say, yes, that's me. Yes, those are my symptoms, or yes, oh my gosh, I'm not imagining things. So it is so empowering and validating, because a lot of times you are dealing with individuals who have gone down so many rabbit holes, had so many labs come back normal, to know they don't feel right?
Yeah.
Innately, because we have innate wisdom. And so that's the beauty of this work, I feel, is it's a huge signpost in the clinical toolbox to where to look to help.
And I think you have just touched on it too, but just to sort of reinforce and emphasize that, for the people that are unwell, you're helping them understand some of these genetic predispositions. Because like you said, sometimes they're like, am I crazy? Is this in my head? Or they're starting to feel a lot of blame, a lot of confusion. And when you can say, hey, you don't, when you get stressed, for example, you don't process and break down those stress hormones as quickly. I mean, I'm sort of simplifying here. But and they're like, oh my God, that is me. And you're
That's
like, hey,
me.
do something about that. We need, for this particular gene, you need to make sure you got plenty of B's, methylation stuff. We need some magnesium. Are you low in magnesium? Oh my goodness, you probably are. Let's try to, put these things in, because genetically this is a bit of an issue, but we can do something lifestyle wise to try to compensate. So I think it's also that kind of understanding, hey, for me, who's had an autoimmune condition, there was a bit of anger and a little bit of,
why me?
Victim type of like, God, I haven't eaten take. This is at the time, right? I was living in Adelaide. I'd been doing research in nutrigenomics. I was exercising. I definitely wasn't overweight. I was like, I haven't had takeaway food, any junk food in 9 years. I do this, I exercise. There was this real like, why me? How did this happen? And then when you start to piece it all together, you're like, okay, I'm stressed out of my eyeballs. I'm like in this position where I'm running really large research studies. I've got a fitness business on the side, pre-children. I was partying on the weekend, like going out, being very social on the weekend. Sleep wasn't a priority. I was probably overtraining. I probably wasn't even eating enough. Now that I look at it as, when you think about the nutrients I would have needed to deal with that work level, that exercise. And on top of all that, I've got a huge genetic predisposition. When you look through my genes with autoimmune health and inflammation, and then I found out, which I didn't know, dads don't talk as much as mums, is actually my dad had serious Graves. So, you know, I ended up working it out genetically, but then I
Yeah.
found out, so I had a family history. So once I put all those pieces together, I stopped playing the victim, the blame game. I was like, you know what? No wonder this happened. No
Yeah.
wonder I got really sick. Like, how long did I think I was going to be able to do this? And I had to work back, and it took, you know, it took 10 months to get off my medication, and I still have to take care of myself. But you
Exactly.
know, work backwards. Yeah.
So a lot of what we find is, let's say people end up with a diagnosis, and when we look through the genes, we find that the diagnosis is not relevant. It's the biochemical imbalances that we find through genes,
Yeah.
which is, so you could be folate deficient and the manifestation is heart disease or hypertension, and you would never connect the two through labs. So
Yeah.
that's the power of this. And then, you know, the other thing, I was just working with someone today, actually a few of my clients more recently. I really struggled with weight. And then when you pull down the information from their genes, you're like, man, your body just doesn't like carbohydrate. You
You're
know?
like, you know,
Yeah.
and you're
And
one of those people that is going to need to exercise. Like,
Yeah.
some people can do a little bit of exercise. Some people, when they exercise, they just don't utilize the same amount of energy.
Exactly.
You know, it's not as good as grabbing that fat out of the cells and, you know, burning that for energy. And we're like, hey, you know, you're going to have to focus on doing this. You're going to, you know, and some people, you know, it's not that when we do the genetic testing, it's an easy fix. And I guess we need to, I don't think anyone listening would think that, but just to sort of say, this is not a magic bullet. There's no one quick supplement. People do have to work hard. But when they're willing to make those changes, it's not just getting off your medication or just getting rid of a disease diagnosis. You're setting yourself up for lifelong health, reducing risk of Alzheimer's and dementia, reducing risk of having a heart attack, like just better quality of life. You know, not getting so sick when coronavirus gets you. So.
Yeah, of course, not everyone's sick who gets it. It's just going to be so interesting to see the data, but yeah. The whole thing with, like, certainly we can look at genes and we say, man, if you had a bucket, there's some people whose bucket is really full, you know, with sluggish insulin genes. That's why I like to call them. And genes are like, hey, just give me carbohydrates and I'm just going to stick that right on your backside.
Yeah.
I mean,
and then you're like my husband, who's like one of the few, I haven't seen many genetic profiles like him. He's like very fat and carb tolerant, and he struggles to keep weight on. I mean, we'll see if things catch up with him, you know, later life.
Watch out.
Honestly, like, he can eat whatever and do whatever. I mean, he's healthy because of the lifestyle we lead, but
he doesn't have the thrifty gene.
But it's rare. Not many.
Yeah,
generally, when you look at the genetics and what we know at this point in time, generally someone is often a bit more carb tolerant or fat tolerant, but he's both. He can.
Oh, he's like it. Yeah, no, I normally see it like this or like this, and it shows up. It's fascinating stuff. Hey, listen, I want to end just coming back to coronavirus. So this is really interesting because we were talking about toxins and detoxification, how important it is to have a healthy liver, because that's essential to removing toxins from the body. For those of you who are like, what are they talking about? Biotransformation, detoxification. But some of the research, it doesn't surprise me, I'm starting to see come out is and I think it'll be validated, is in areas where there's poor air quality, we may see a higher rate of hospitalizations related to COVID-19 because it's a respiratory disease. And, you know, I think we've been walking around for too long around the world saying, it's fine, you know, but trust me, Denise, there are people who have horrible gene profiles when it comes to getting rid of toxins. I mean, that's probably an unfair word, but there are some people who really can't handle any kind of toxic burden. Or very
and unfortunately, our world these days is quite toxic. And, you know, once you know, you can make lots of changes.
Yes.
Once you know, and you know to look for things, whether it's in your skincare or your shampoo or, you know, whatever you're doing. But there are lots that we can't avoid. Lots in the air, lots in the water. I mean, you can obviously get filtered water, but, you know, you need to become aware of that, because some people are definitely more sensitive. And, you know, and again, talking about the environment, not that I want to finish on a downer, I can probably hopefully turn this into a positive, but when you think about what we're doing with the environment, it is likely that we'll see more of these things, like with coronavirus, when we are doing things like deforestation and we're getting, you know, closer into animal sort of territory. This is actually something that I haven't said to anyone. I know we're trying to finish up. I probably shouldn't throw this in now.
It's something
I've been thinking about. you know, animals house a lot of, you know, viruses and pathogens and bacteria, but we all know when we're well and healthy, how well we tolerate these things. But, you know, look at the animals, how they were being kept in the Wuhan markets. I've seen some pretty graphic photos. You know, they're being housed in these, no wonder they're getting sick. They would be stressed. Their immune system would be working. So they're getting sick. And the thing is, when we are taking away, you know, the homes and the areas that animals live in, something that might have just been in their body, all of a sudden they're more susceptible. They're getting sick, they're stressed, they've lost their home, they've lost their food source, they're more susceptible, they're getting sick. And all of a sudden our interaction with these animals, because they're coming into suburbia, because they're coming into suburbia. Now, I haven't actually said this out loud to anyone yet, but it's stuff that's been sort of going through my head.
I totally agree.
I'm thinking, you know, they're coming in and they're looking for food in our rubbish bin, or you would say trash can, or wherever it is. Because, you know, so the more that we interfere with their environment, the sicker they're going to get, and then they're going to infect us. So I think we may see more of this in the future if we don't start to really care for our environment. And I'm going to let you comment, and then I have something to try to finish on a positive.
Yeah, and you know, it's so interesting. So I saw this data and you connect it to genetics, say, oh yeah, this makes sense. But to your point, of all things, I just happened to catch something in that the Pope was doing one of his sermons or what have you yesterday, I think, and said, he directly pointed to the environment. He said that I think this pandemic is a reflection of the destruction of the environment. Now, whether he's thinking along the same lines as you, he probably was. So I think it's right on. I mean, come on, people, let's seize the day here. So let me hand it to you for some final.
Yeah, so as you know, we all need to, and hopefully everyone during this time is not just thinking about adapting their business, adapting how they live, but actually thinking about the environment. And while we are staying home, one of the amazing things is that we are not, you know, the planes aren't flying, less pollution in the air, less pollution with the cars. We're actually giving nature, Mother Nature, a little break.
Yes.
So even though it's a pain in the butt for some of us to be home, to be honest, I don't mind it too much, but I work from home anyway. But, you know, just think about, you know, even if this is a difficult time for you, think about what we do to the environment, the planet all the time. We're giving nature a little break. So, you know, think about this, have this time to reassess what's important to you and your family and how we can do things differently.
Totally. It's such a positive note. So, Denise, you've been actually doing some videos and they're posted on YouTube. So what's your channel and how can people find you anyway?
Yeah, so people can find me. The best place would be, I'm trying to post everything on Facebook. I do have a YouTube channel. I guess it's my name, Denise Furness, Dr. Denise Furness. But if you go to my Facebook, which is Dr. Denise Furness, PhD, that's the business page. If you find my personal page, that's fine. But on the business page, I have posted some simple stuff on what is coronavirus for the general public that are a bit confused. Yeah. Some information on wearing masks, because here, different in the US, but in Australia, they're telling us not to wear masks. So I'm giving some opinions on that. And today I'll be posting a few more little things on washing hands, 5G. I don't know if you're getting it, but I'm getting questions about 5G. So today, whether I get it out today or not, but I'll be recording some issues with, you know, the corona and 5G question. I'm also going to be talking a little bit more about animals and pets, because I've been getting lots of questions about pets. And just know that your pet isn't going to give you coronavirus. If I can just say that one thing, don't give your pet away. Your pet won't make you sick. Yeah.
That's great. So Dr. Denise Furness, PhD, on Facebook, find her. She does some really good videos. So
thank you.
presenter too.
There'll be lots more. And I really appreciate your time, Amanda. And I'm grateful for even just the last few weeks, you and I communicating about this. You know, we obviously want to get this message out and help as many people as we can.
Totally. We'll have you back. Thanks, Denise.
Bye. Bye from Australia.